This is no ordinary love.
Good evening. Welcome to Healing Quest. I'm Deborah Arneson, your host for tonight, and we have a terrific show for you. The show tonight we're offering to you is hosted by me, and we have our guest Jim Salama, who's just a fantastic human being. I'd heard about Jim for years and years and years and never really had the honor of meeting him until recently. And Jim is the owner and the entrepreneur who began Conscious Choice here in Chicago, which is a terrific magazine where you can find all the answers to all the things you need to know about health, healing, and alternative medicine. And then that wasn't enough work for him. He needed triplets. So he decided to start Sustain. And Sustain is a wonderful organization that is a huge advocacy for consumers to learn and eat and indulge more in organic foods and support local farmers and certainly grow that industry, which is very unsupported or has been to date until you've come along. So thank you so much for being here,
My
Jim.
pleasure.
It's great
Thanks
to
for
have
having me.
you. It's just wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to know more about you. So
Mm-hmm.
where did you come up with all these wonderful visions? How did this all evolve in your life? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, that's a good question. Thanks. Conscious Choice really came about because I was in my 20s. I was a certified financial planner. I was doing a lot of socially responsible investments. But down deep, I knew I wanted to be a writer. And I was also an ardent environmentalist and really didn't feel like the mainstream media was covering those issues. Also, I was very into alternative health. And at that point, 17 years ago, nobody was talking really about it. I mean, if you were doing acupuncture or
You were weird.
naprapathy, you were just whacked out.
Yeah.
And so, on the side, I started this magazine. And my friends thought I was nuts. They're like, in Chicago, you're going to start a alternative.
And they're still down in martinis eating hot dogs for lunch.
Exactly. So, but, that was in '88, and slow but trying to get paid for 7 years. I kept my financial business. But
You had a vision.
it was my passion, and I had a great partner, Ross, and he and I just kind of like plugged along. And then Sandra came, and some other wonderful staff, and we had a good time. And but then Whole Foods came to town, and I realized, what, we might be able to actually make a living doing this.
Sure.
So I transitioned out of my financial business and used the money from that to support me moving into Conscious Choice full time, and it's been going strong ever since.
So Conscious Choice is how old now? 14 years old?
No, 16 years old.
Wow, that's great. And it's a great magazine. If you're not familiar with it, you need to go grab it. It's everywhere, all over the city, and it has just great editorials, really good information on just current things that you need to know about to keep you and your family safe and healthy, basically. And it has all kinds of information on practitioners and, people who are local, books that you need to be reading. It's a really good resource guide.
And some really beautiful advertisers.
We have some good ads
There's
going
a couple
in
of
there,
them
too.
around here, as a matter of fact.
We love Conscious Choice. And it's a well-read magazine. I mean, everyone reads it. That's why people advertise with you, too.
Yeah, well, we've got, our circulation now is about 60,000.
That's great.
And which means we've got over 100,000 people a month reading it.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and we're also, and a couple years ago, we created a new company called Dragonfly Media.
Tell us about that.
Dragonfly, actually now, basically Conscious Choice was the model for Dragonfly, and we now have magazines in, besides Chicago, LA, San Francisco, Seattle, and Vancouver. And we're going to be doing a startup in New York City in 2005.
That's exciting.
Which is
So
really exciting.
Dragonfly Media is actually Conscious Choice with a different name?
Well, Conscious Choice is basically the holding company that owns Conscious Choice and these 4 other magazines.
Okay.
All of which we bought, which had existing readership and names.
Oh, good.
And in most cases, they're keeping their names. In some cases, we've changed the names, but we want them to have a unique local kind of feel to them. So it's great.
That's wonderful. So if people were in LA, what would they look for?
Oh, it's called Whole Life Times.
Whole Lifetime. So there's different headers in each city.
Right. And
Cool.
actually, if you go to dragonflymedia.com, there's a list of all of them. Or consciouschoice.com, of course, could give you a link to Dragonfly, but also have all of our current monthly editorial and
You're
then back editorial.
a visionary here, Jim Salama, aren't you?
Well,
You
I come up with
are.
a lot of ideas.
That's great, though. But you put
Mhm.
them to action. You actually
Yeah.
move them out, and you have persistence, and you have endurance,
Yeah.
which makes it all work.
Yeah,
So
thank
now,
you.
tell me how you then move from. I know Dragonfly is relatively new, right?
Mhm.
Within the last
Yeah.
year or so.
Couple years, 2 years.
So you're just like this Einstein. You just keep creating. And Sustain was a vision that you had
Mhm.
as of when?
Well, that was 8 years ago,
Okay.
and actually in '95, um, I was doing journalism and conscious choice and realized that this incinerator on the west side of Chicago was putting out 150,000 pounds of lead per year.
Oh my gosh.
And I knew that because at the time my wife and I were living in Logan Square, and when the wind was blowing in the wrong direction, it was like, it stunk really bad, and
Really?
Patty would get sick. I mean, not
Oh.
violently sick, but she'd get headaches and she didn't feel well. And we were 3 miles away at least.
Amazing.
So,
What were they burning?
trash.
That was it.
Trash.
Dang.
Yeah, and it was old and not really up to code.
Okay.
So, so there's this great coalition, including Keith, the producer, who was working to try to shut the incinerator down. So we partnered with them, myself, and then I got a friend of mine who was an advertising guy, John Besky. And John and I worked together. We created some ads and we did some public relations around it. Helped to spur a rally at the incinerator, which drew 200 people in March on a Tuesday, and all this created just a big buzz, especially the ads. We had 2 kids who had lead poisoning and lived near the incinerator. And we told their
Oh
story.
gosh.
So it was very powerful, and ultimately, I think in part because of the Great Coalition and this communications campaign, all the attention, it was shut down.
That's great.
And so it was a great victory, and I said, wow, this communication stuff works.
Yeah.
What if the environmental movement had a group that was really skilled at this? So I used that as a kind of a springboard to go out and raise some money, start a nonprofit, raise some money, and then in '96 we launched Sustain with a couple of full-time employees, plus myself part-time and John part-time.
And what is your vision for Sustain?
Well, basically we want to create a sustainable world. And so we
What
do
does
that.
that mean to people? A lot of people are sustainable. What's sustainable?
That's a good. It is. It's. I guess I'm sometimes so close to it I don't even realize that.
Right.
But it's a good point. Well, sustainable means, for one, being self-sufficient. So you don't have to take a lot of extra resources, and particularly you don't have to deplete resources, which our current kind of economic system is very
Set up.
much about exploiting resources, putting pollution out there and not being responsible for
Right.
any of those things. So a sustainable system basically creates enough to support all of the people who are within a community or a country, culture, but it's not putting out all of the external things like the pollutants and the other things. And, you could create
Do
a
you
happy,
find people
healthy.
care about this enough, Jim?
No, people are, unfortunately, our
Overwhelmed?
culture is very, people are just
I mean, when I
trying to
talk
get
of-
through the end of the day.
Right. And when I talk to people about the environment and global warming, they're just like, a lot of times.
I
It's
know.
like, just move it to the bottom of the totem pole because it's just not something I can even talk
Deal
about or
with.
deal with. I'm like, but you have to think about the ramifications, 10, 15, 20, 50 years down the road. What kind of air are your kids and your grandchildren going to be breathing? Now,
Right.
maybe our society's become more myopic, and it's more just about me today and getting by and, getting my head on the pillow and having enough money in the bank and enough stocks and blah, blah, blah. But I really, I don't quite get why people aren't more aware and more interested in making a difference.
Right.
Well,
Well, in 1990, I helped produce a big event in Lincoln Park, Earth Day. And it was huge. We had 150,000 people there. And, the mayor and Senator Simon and, the Bodines and Michelle
Sure.
Schacht, all that. I mean, it was great. And then the year after that, the economy tanked.
right.
The the first Bush recession #1 hit, and then corporations just totally went after the environment. Anybody who was threatened by the environmental movement just really went after it, and unfortunately, I don't think it's recovered from that point. And there's still a lot of promising areas, but unless we figure out how to do environmentalism in conjunction with economic development and job creation, and creating
Education.
I mean, really creating a much more holistic system that provides very tangible benefits to the community, then resources, there's not going to be enough resources, and people, people are
It's
worried
going to
about
spiral
tomorrow.
too fast.
Yeah. So so that's a lot of what we're working on now.
So what does the consumer do to help? How does someone who's watching this show get involved at like a limited level, albeit, but in any way? What can someone just begin to do?
Right. Well, I think you can start to do it in part through the types of things that you consume. Whether it be, if you need a light bulb, rather than buying a traditional light bulb, why don't you buy one that's energy efficient and gets, uses 13 watts instead of 75 to put out the same amount of light. So
Where do you get those?
well, you can get them anywhere, Home Depot.
Cool.
Yeah, they're all over. I mean, that's a simple thing. But
That's a big thing,
yeah, well, because but in being more efficient, number one, you're saving money.
right?
Number two, and if you do it with all your bulbs or certain bulbs, you can save a considerable amount of money. Long term, the bulbs are more expensive, but then you end up saving more money in the long run
Well,
because
I'm
you
sure
pay less for
a lot
electricity.
of people don't know about this. I
No,
didn't.
Of course.
I should.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, exactly.
What else?
To me, food is probably the biggest area. I think that the way food is produced conventionally now, it's pretty much grown by big factory farms, and they use a lot of toxins.
Let's talk about what goes into growing our food in America and why organic is truly far better and more sensible
Right.
from a health vantage point, because cancer is so rampant and growing
Right.
so quickly.
Right.
Talk a little bit, if you would, about what they use
Sure.
for growing our commercially grown foods that are non-organic.
Yeah, and honestly, this is why I do what I do. My family's been devastated by cancer, and it was very upsetting. I didn't really understand it for a long time when I was growing up. My father died, my mother had breast cancer, my brother died, my nephew,
Oh my gosh.
aunts, uncles,
On and
cousins,
on.
and 40% of Americans get cancer.
Right.
And not that it's all about food, because it's about being out of balance.
Right.
I believe it's a system out of balance. Cancer is just a symptom of
It's
a
a
system
presenter, yes.
out of balance. But honestly, when you look at what they put in our food, they spray poisons that are mutagenic, estrogenic, and carcinogenic. And if you're not a scientist, mutagenic means it can cause mutagens and birth defects. Estrogenic means it screws up your hormones and your estrogen or your endocrine system.
Right, your balance.
Yeah, you're totally out of whack. And
Carcinogenic is
and
cancer.
carcinogenic is cancerous. So
And mutagenic still leads to cancer or some type of disease
could.
because it causes cellular changes on a very biochemical level.
exactly.
So you're setting yourself up for disaster.
Right. And then plus you got hormones. And you wonder about people who are having, like in men, colon cancer is running rampant. And they say, oh, well, don't eat red meat. The studies show that if you eat red meat, you're going to get cancer. And I got to be honest, my gut says it's not the red meat. It's the fact that the cows have been shot up with hormones, and then the hormone residue stays in the tissue, which is
Right.
the red meat. And then you eat the red meat, and you
And it
have
stays in you.
It stays in you, and it's just completely disrupting your
Yeah.
system.
We have a saying, you are what you eat and what you don't excrete. You know?
Exactly.
And we're not just talking about feces. We're talking about just chemicals and pesticides and toxins,
Exactly.
xenoestrogens. So,
Mhm.
so what goes into growing commercial food? Do you want to share that fine tidbit with our viewing audience?
Yeah, I mean, so we've got all of these things. We've got antibiotics. We've got the hormones. We've got all these pesticides. And so, number one, you have food which has residues. And it's quite clear that there's residues. And, the science bears that out. Now, of course, the EPA and the FDA says, oh, well, they're well within standards.
Normal limits.
Yeah, but you know what?
Scary.
I don't believe that their science is good because, number one, they've never looked at what the impact on multiple residues is.
Right.
And so sometimes you might have a strawberry with 8 different pesticides.
On it.
They've never looked at more than one. Number two, they've never looked at what the impact of these things on children, and they set the residues based on adult weights, not on children's weights. So if you have kids, you definitely shouldn't be eating. Definitely shouldn't be eating non-organic food, in my opinion. And lastly, when they set these standards, the science doesn't back it up, and in many cases, they haven't even truly
Done the science,
done
the studies.
science.
Well, they can't because, first of all, there are over 6,000 pesticides, if I'm not mistaken.
Or at least chemicals that are somehow
And chemicals and pesticides and
exposed
herbicides
to-
combined in this country. And I believe in the European community they allow no more than 600, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
Am I right
they're
on that
starting to
number?
ban a lot of them in Europe. I don't know the numbers specifically.
But one goes out, one comes in. If one comes in, one goes out. Here, it's just an astronomical amount
I know.
of chemicals, herbicides, and pesticides. And that stuff doesn't go away. It's not biodegradable. It likes to hang out in the fat tissues in the
Exactly.
body, right?
Yep.
So you're going to cause all kinds of disruptions. And then the stuff we're growing our food in, again, coming back to your point, they can't test it because now we have this huge experiment going on. We're all part of it.
We are.
Okay, we're walking in this experiment, and how can you test 6,000 pesticide residues, which are, rotated on a different body? Because you're going to react differently
Sure.
than I'm going to react.
That's the other thing, is
There's
that
too much
everybody
individuality.
reacts totally different
Right.
to these things.
And you might present with lowered thyroid function or prostate, inflamed prostate function. I might present with inflamed pancreatitis and or, diabetic trends or
Right.
who knows. It's all different. So your genetic predisposition, I think, becomes more manifested when there's more insult and injury.
Exactly.
It's really scary stuff.
Not a good thing at all.
So testing is ambiguous, so those guidelines are ridiculous. I
Right.
call them, the RDAs are ridiculous. A lot of things are ridiculous about the
course.
parameters of what's allowed in our food chain. I always tell my clients, no one is your advocate in Washington. You need to look out for yourself.
Right.
You just do. You need to be a savvy consumer. You need to garner as much information from as many places as possible, and then make a decision that's sound, based on intellect in part and intuition in part. Does that sound smart? Don't do it. So what about the sewer sludge that we grow our commercial food in? Tell people about this, because people don't believe me half the time. They're like, what are you smoking? I'm like, seriously, you have no idea what you're eating.
Yeah, well, actually, that is the case. On some farms, they actually do use sewage sludge.
There's
and
no
the sludge, not only are
restriction.
the remainder of raw sewage, but even worse, particularly from a municipal sewage system, it's everything else that they put down the drain, from Drano to industrial waste that could be
Yep.
from small factories that don't have to use
Right.
oh,
Pharmaceuticals,
yeah,
medications,
exactly.
all kinds of things.
Not an ideal situation.
Well, and I also share with my clients, that it takes nitrogen, phosphorus, and a seed and water to make a perfect looking tomato without any nutritional value whatsoever. And then you've got genetically modified, right? Do you want to share that little fun thing to know and tell with people?
Yeah, well, fortunately, they're not doing tomatoes too much anymore,
Right.
but a lot of the grains in America, more than half of the corn and soybeans, are genetically modified. And with that, and it's not in the typical sense where they're crossbreeding one soybean to another to come up with more positive traits. They're actually taking genetic material from a different species, so transgenic genetic engineering, and then they put it, they shoot it into, somehow they shoot it into the seed,
Right.
and then they grow this new crop, which is novel in that it's never existed before on the planet. And so in essence, they're playing God, and they're playing God without really having had
They're creating mutated foods.
a scientific or a moral debate, because the scientific debate, they shoved it down our politicians' throat without really examining the significance of what they were doing. And in many cases, when science showed that there were problems, that science was then repressed.
Right. Pushed aside, swept under the carpet.
Yeah,
And what about the viral induction?
Oh,
That's been happening since the mid-90s, from what I've read.
And I don't know a lot about it, but there are actually, in some cases, they're using markers from antibiotics, and there's other. I mean, the science there is really suspect. I believe.
It's twisted.
And
It's a little twisted.
you know, and what are they doing it for? They're genetically engineering corn so that they put a poison in it.
Right.
So every cell of this corn has a toxin in it, and oh, heaven forbid, that little larva, starts munching on the corn, it dies. So I'm supposed to eat this stuff. It kills butterflies, but I'm eating it. It doesn't make too much
Plus
sense
the
to me.
larvae and the boll weevils have become more accustomed to the viral loads, and they're becoming stronger.
I
So
know.
now they've started putting the antibiotics on top of the viruses,
know.
shooting them into the kernel, so that actually if you continually ate corn products, which everyone does in this culture, it's in our soda pops,
Right.
our sweets, our gummy bears, everybody's cookies and crackers and cakes and desserts and packaged foods and corn chips, and corn's everywhere. And if you're eating corn that's not organic, it's genetically modified,
Right.
which means you're eating viruses and you're eating antibiotics more than likely, which means if you ever need an antibiotic, it probably won't work so well.
It's a little scary.
It's amazing. How did this
And
stuff
then the
come
other
around?
one, and then soybeans, they actually genetically engineer the soybeans so that they can spray more of their pesticide, their
Right.
patented pesticide on it.
So it could withstand the Roundup. Yeah.
So it's like, excuse me, but like, what's the benefit to me in all this? Basically, it's benefits to either
Yeah.
the companies producing it, or maybe benefits to the farmers. But actually, the yields on these things have been shown to be the same or less.
You know what
than
I would love to know?
conventional yields.
I would love to know, and this is just a query, and gee, I'd love to have someone do a search for me, but I would love to know what the tie-in is between these companies like the Monsantos of the world that create these genetically modified products and their relationship to cancer centers and or to, radiation or pharmaceutical companies. I mean, there has to be a tie-in. There's no way they cannot know that this would cause aberrations, and problems with people's health. We're running out of time. We're just gabbing away here. We better get moving.
Yeah, okay.
How is much of the organic food in Chicago grown locally?
Actually, not enough. In fact, there was a study done 2 years ago. We participated in the release. It was commissioned by the Prairie Crossing subdivision up in Grays Lake, because they have an organic farm on it, and they were curious about the market. And so they hired a man named Eric Burkerts, who did the study, and they surveyed all the retailers and restaurants and so forth. And at the time, the market for organic produce was about $63 to $80 million. And they showed that only 3% of it was grown anywhere near here.
Really?
Yeah. And produce is about 21% of our food
So there's
dollars.
room for it.
Oh, there's
lots.
tons. Yeah, and produce is only 21% of what we spend on food. So,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, if you do the math, we probably have a $300 million market for organic food in
Oh,
Chicago,
sweet.
and most of it's being grown elsewhere.
Wow. So how do people in Chicago support our local farmers to grow organically? This is a really important
Well, it's a
question.
good question. Number one, they could go to farmers markets and buy directly from the farmers and look for organic growers. And actually, there's more. I'm on the board of the Green City Market, which is every Wednesday on Clark and
Lincoln Park.
just north of North Avenue in Lincoln Park. It's a great market. It starts at 7, goes till 1. A lot of organic producers there. Some of the other markets, I know Lincoln Park does, Evanston, Oak Park, Wilmette. More and more of the markets are getting organic producers there.
That's great.
And then of course you can you can join a farm. You can join a CSA, a community supported farm, and you get a box of produce once a week.
That's great.
Which is great.
Yes, it is. It's excellent.
Yeah, and it's all fresh and seasonal.
It's wonderful. So what do we do in the winter?
Well, it's harder to get local stuff in the winter, even though, one of the things Sustainers did when we created this project, our first one was the Local Organic Initiative. And so we're working with these local farmers, trying to get them into markets, and also working with some universities to try to figure out how we can build seasons and,
Great.
do more
Hothouses
greenhouse
and-
growing
yeah.
and some other things. And this is the work with the university is just preliminary, but I think there's a lot of potential there. The other thing that we did was we've created a new project called FamilyFarmed.org, and that's FARMED.org. So if you go to the internet, www.familyfarms.org, and on that site you'll see farmers. There's Find a Farmer, and you can pick out farmers from different states, and
That's great.
at this point they're organic producers, and many of them are selling to Whole Foods Market. So you can go to Whole Foods, and actually now Whole Foods has FamilyFarm.org labels up on their shelves.
The stickers.
So you can see, it's not actually on the produce itself, even though next year we hope we'll have that
Good.
set up. But it's on the shelf. So let's say there's some greens, and next to the collards from Wisconsin, there's a FamilyFarm.org Wisconsin sticker on it. So you can actually access these local products and know where they're from. Ultimately, we're going to set up a certification system which will then certify it for values in addition to organic.
That's
so,
great.
for example, appropriate scale. It's not going to be from a 10,000 acre organic farm. It'll be from a 100 or 200 or 50 or 10 acre organic farm.
Wow.
Humane treatment of animals. It's going to be really produced with
that's
standards that
wonderful.
are
God
the kind of
bless
standards
you.
that we want. And for consumers who are interested in this, we're going to have a show. And Deborah's going to be one of our speakers.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's going to be in March. I think the first week of March.
Great.
We're looking at Navy Pier. We're getting close to actually having it at the Grand Ballroom.
So would people go to sustain.org?
Actually,
to find out-
FamilyFarm.org. All the information.
Oh, is right there. Okay,
And
great.
so the expo then will allow people to meet the farmers
Isn't that wonderful?
and hear speakers and see other companies that are
Fun.
part of this local food system. And then there will be a trade component to it, so farmers can get with restaurants and retailers and
Your days are busy.
and food processors and farmers market administrators, and it's all about more information flow and more accountability and connecting people.
I just can't tell you how impressed I am with all that you do. It's really amazing. I mean, you're making a huge difference, not only in this community, but you're just gonna create a tidal wave. God bless you, Jim. It's really wonderful.
I think our culture is. There's a lot of people creating tidal waves out there, and I think we all need to just start
This
riding
is
them
important
together.
stuff, yep, and coalesce together. Jim, we're out of time, unfortunately. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Oh, my pleasure.
Really appreciate your time and the
That's
information.
wonderful.
This was great. You're fabulous. And if you'd like more information about Sustain and farmers.org, please give us a jingle. Call the number on the phone or on the tube here, and we'll refer you to Jim, and you can just go to the website and check things out. But this is important stuff for you, your family, your health, your future. Take good care. I'm Deborah Arneson, bringing you Healing Quest. Good night. God bless.
Have fun.
And it always will be white cloud, white swan, white light from beyond the beyond. White cloud, white swan, white light from beyond the beyond, the beyond.